this computer. Hello, welcome to Discovery Energy Work again. I am super impressed, and after a couple of time zone differences, I have a very, I want to use these words that I don't normally use, but I think it's my great pleasure and honor to have Isabel Clarke. Is it Professor Isabel Clarke? Should I say that? Or
No, 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 no.
no?
The irony is I'm Mrs. Isabel Clarke because though I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and doctoral equivalent, I trained before they gave doctorates, and I've never bothered to do anything about it.
All right, that's all right.
And
That's almost
I'm
like
not.
an intro.
I have never worked as an academic. I've always worked in the English NHS.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
So I am a clinician
You're a
first and
clinician.
foremost.
Can you do a
I
little
work in
intro for us
hospitals.
then, so that people,
Sorry.
my podcast, I think it's I don't want to say a ragtag bunch because I don't know what they're like, but they're generally interested in psychic phenomena, remote viewing, healing, uh, miraculous healing even. So,
Mm,
uh,
mm.
yeah, how would you introduce yourself to them?
Right. Well, though I have this very straight job as a consultant clinical psychologist in the NHS,
Hmm.
I'm a bit of an infiltrator, and I come from different places. I originally did a history degree. So I have an interest in things spiritual, in the sort of contemplative Christianity literature, that kind of thing. I know about mysticism and what have you. I've also had a long association with a little organization called the Epiphany Philosophers, who were operational in Cambridge, where we lived, me and my late husband, in the 60s and 70s, and carried on. And they were interested in the sorts of things which were clearly happening, but which science sort of binned because it didn't fit in with the paradigm. And so they were very interested in psychic things, and they were also a sort of third order Christian contemplative group. So they were very interested in mysticism and Christianity and things. So when I switched to study psychology in midlife because A, I got fed up with history, and B, a friend had a breakdown when we were all in our 20s, and I felt that mental health was something that was imperfectly understood, and I wanted to rethink it, which is what I have done in my career. And I brought together my understanding of sort of human consciousness and what have you that came about through my study of psychology with what is going on in what I would call across the threshold, the transliminal, in the part of experience that is not well contained by straightforward science.
What does transliminal mean? I don't even know that.
No, no, it's a word. It's a word that was adopted from Thalborn by Claridge. Claridge led a research group that for decades studied openness to unusual experiencing, openness to anomalous experiencing, and which is called schizotypy. And he used the word that as human beings, we've got two ways of knowing, two ways of experiencing. One is when everything is very normal, predictable, just as you'd expect.
Mm.
And the other is when you step into another place where things open up, there's expanded consciousness, there is a sense of stepping away from being grounded in individual self-consciousness. And things become possible, and psychic things, connection beyond the self and that sort of thing becomes open, but things also become unstable and dangerous. And that's where the
I
psychosis
mean, I can
comes in.
relate to that, and I think we're going to get to that. I'm curious. Did you have, when you were with the Epiphany philosophers, were you
Philosophers.
having psychic experiences? Were you having like visions
No,
no? It
no,
was just
no.
interest in that.
I've always had a sense of connection with that which is beyond. I was a naturally religious child
Hmm.
in a family that was much less religious than me.
Okay.
Well, in fact, a father who was frankly atheist, and a mother who was open to these things, but didn't take it as seriously as I did. So I've always had an interest in crossing the threshold. I've always hovered on it.
Right. And what is so can you express what does that mean? Like connected with it. How does that express itself for you?
It's we know about relationship by feeling.
Hmm.
We Our information about relationships is feeling,
Hmm.
and so it is something that I knew about through feeling.
Right.
The other part of my life, which is a bit sort of weird and transliminal, is the way in which it was organized by dreams.
Oh, okay.
And I'm certainly my relationship with Chris Clarke, my late husband, was brought about by dreams.
Oh, can you talk about that? Is that something you can talk about?
Well,
I'm
I
fascinated.
expressed it. It's complicated, but I summed up. I did a good summing up in the tribute that I paid to him at the funeral, where I said I was sorry. I find it very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I understand.
our, ours was an arranged marriage, arranged by no human agency. We were very young people.
Hmm.
We were immature, just 20-year-olds when we met.
Wow.
We weren't looking for life partners or
It's so funny
like
because I
that. We
find
were
like
nowhere. We were nowhere in the dating stinks.
it's so funny because I picked this up straight away. I'm like, wow, there's an incredibly strong connection. I feel it's still there. And I'm like, well,
Oh,
I'm
it is. Oh, yeah. The fact that he's dead makes no difference.
yes, yes, and I can relate to that, to having lost someone very close as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it's a sensitive topic, and I don't want to, I'm really not into sort of creating anything sensational because I think we've got so many really important topics to talk about. But if you're comfortable talking about it when it comes in, I'd love to, expand on it because I think I always say to people, your intuition starts with feeling. And it's a physical
yeah,
feeling. It's literally,
yeah,
where do you feel
yeah,
it? Just name a body part that you don't need
yeah,
to go
yeah,
into.
yeah.
Like when I'm doing Tai Chi and I touch someone, I say, "What did you feel?" They'll often say, "You moved your energy," and I'm like, "No, tell me what your body felt. Yeah, really, really stay grounded in you now."
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I can totally relate to that. And now I'm a little bit lost. Where should we go?
Sorry, yes. Well, you were. I mean, I guess we need to get back to my work and
Love to.
to the transliminal. I think we got lost. We got lost in the transliminal, which is
Well,
what one does.
I'm interested in so what personally I think you might say if it's okay what I find enjoyable in my podcast is asking people's personal stories. So there was
Right.
that
Yeah.
idea of asking you when you were 20 something and you experienced a friend that was going into that transliminal space and getting knowledge from
No,
someone.
no, shit. It wasn't like that. She had a horrible depression.
Oh, okay.
She was in. She was in hospital and she was given ECT, which is criminal.
Right, right.
And yeah, it was almost a sort of opposite thing. She closed down physically and in every way this lively, highly intelligent, sort of amazing person sort of became heavy and, diminished. And I wanted to understand. But the good news is she came out of that and she had a good career in publishing and journalism, and we're good friends still. So there's a good ending to the story, though she had to deal with periodic depressions. That right. Was, because some people have vivid moods,
yeah,
and they have to learn to manage that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, how do we progress from that then? So we
right.
go from that was motivating you to go to say, like, okay, there's got
I wanted to know what is going on when somebody stops functioning in that sort of way. And the idea that, it's all to do with chemicals. Well, for one thing, the hospital took no new notice of the fact that she'd just been unceremoniously dumped by the love of her life, which obviously had an impact. And okay, she might have had a vulnerability, but she was reacting to what had happened. Right. And so in the course of trying to understand the vulnerability really of the human mind, and the what I call the shifting sands of the self. That the self is not this given. We have when we're in that joined up place where the older part of our mind and the newer bit, the verbal bit, are working together, then we think we know who we are. It feels as if we know exactly who we are. But that's intrinsically unstable.
And isn't that like, I think you find a lot of these gurus, and some of them not quite so pucker as the others, but they're question of like, find yourself, who are you? There's this search for self, which
the gurus
destabilizing, really. Sometimes.
The gurus assume that there is a self. I'm arguing, and it's a hypothesis, because say the title of my book says it, Madness, Mystery, and the Survival of God. I'm very aware that we're dealing with here things that we are not in a position to really fully understand. It goes beyond what we can know. So our verbal sorting things out, analytical brain comes up with explanations, and it works really fast when things are difficult to understand, but not necessarily very coherently. So the idea of the self or the real self, or, I actually reject that. I think the self is work in progress.
I think, that's my personal experience. I've been writing on it. I think I call it like, in fact, I'd say like, there's a Buddhist expression: when you find yourself, you lose yourself. When you lose yourself, you find yourself, which means.
No, I think Buddhism, has got this. Yeah.
Yes, it's neither of those. That means it's not finding yourself. It's also not losing yourself. So it's a paradoxical mystery that is the self, is what you're supposed to find. And that's the way it is. Are you expecting more?
One of my exercises and one of the ways that I work therapeutically is called aspects of self, and it's really subpersonalities and what have you. But I like neutral, rather ordinary language, and just the idea that everybody can find different aspects,
Mm,
and each one has a good side and a bad side and a less good side.
mm.
So they can sort of swivel, so that there's no bits that you want to totally reject. You just want to get the healthier bit of it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And the idea, then the image that I use is the orchestra conductor, that it's not like there is a self in the middle, but there is this orchestra conductor who says, bit less of that. Can we have a little bit more of this one, please?
yes.
If you learn your mindfulness well and you're aware of what's going on.
Right. And then what I've noticed, because I've been watching, I've spent the last few days watching other interviews, people interviewing you and you teaching, and just trying to prepare myself. And what I found interesting was how see, that's just gone out of my head. I am awful. But I think what I'm saying is like we sometimes when we experience the something like I mean let me refer to myself. So I was experiencing energy outside the body that I could feel, and I could feel it when it moved, I could feel it when it was still, I could feel it when it was good or bad. So the boundary of self was now absolutely like anomalous. It was like what has happened. And I was in China. I was in a group of people who had exactly the same experiences, would have exactly the same perceptions, but myself was now you literally like yourself had been put in a bigger room.
Yes, I mean that sort of expanded consciousness and the porosity of the self being porous, or that it, once you step over that threshold, if you're bounded in, I've got. Would a diagram be helpful? I could probably bring one up.
Well, we can put a reference to one if you have one on the website.
Yes.
We can like put a link to it.
Yeah, it's the diagram that I use everywhere in all my writings, is of the overlapping. I take it from dialectical behavior therapy, the emotion mind and the reasonable mind, and it overlaps at what DBT calls the wise mind. And that is when our new brain verbal side is well connected with our emotional relational side, and they're talking to each other. And my understanding is based on a model of cognitive architecture, which is very carefully sort of worked out with lots of experimentation and what have you, called interacting cognitive subsystems, which says that that wise mind place is inherently unstable, and what they say is there is no boss. That the self is this process that's going on, but at high and low arousal, these two separate out, and it'll be the emotional, relational, the older brain side, which will be more in charge. And that means you're open out to relationship. And in the psychic sense, this can be relationship beyond. I think we have the ability to sort of plug into psychic contents, which, channeling, past life regression, all these things can be seen as possession, somehow being either invaded or drawing down other psychic content.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, that's where I feel like the energy. I mean, I've been in Asia a long time, and the energy model fits quite well. Like literally, an energy enters your energy, and then you work with that energy. You get information from that energy, and then you uninvite it. Or if you've got a problem, then it wants to stay and be a a negative influence. But I don't see much of a difference between that and the separate parts of self, ironically, like,
Mm.
the father or the warrior or the
Yeah,
archetype.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Well, I mean, that's because there is no boss. Our self can inhabit these different potentials.
yeah. And so I suppose where I think where our interests are where they cover each other is
Mm.
I'm interested in the psychic and you're interested in helping people get back to mental health, especially when they're having a psychic episode or a psychotic episode. And I think
Yeah.
you made that note which I made when I was uh, doing an internship in a mental hospital in Germany, that
Mm.
these spiritual experiences were written down in the DSM as not good. Yeah, if you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
that, by the
yeah,
way,
yeah, yeah.
don't tell
Uh,
anyone because you're likely to be
yeah,
you're going to
absolutely.
get
No, no,
held
no,
of.
no. They'll
You'll be
up your
drooling.
medication and stop your leave. Yes, no.
They're gonna absolutely hammer it. So and I've noticed with things like Reiki, especially, like suddenly people turn their lives upside down and they've got the energy, but the energy, this spiritual energy becomes the center and they lose themselves a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I was wondering, so have you got any anecdotes of that happening and how you've worked with it or?
Uh, I mean, I guess I'm not. I haven't worked directly with psychosis really for a long time.
Okay.
So I think there's, I suppose the other thing that I do, apart from my job, I work um, as a volunteer with an organization called the Spiritual Crisis Network,
Oh,
and I work very closely with them.
mhm.
And we provide a sort of email answering service. So people find the Spiritual Crisis Network website and they feel, that their life is getting out of control in some way, which, is part of their spiritual journey. That's how they frame it. And they get in touch with us and we give them we've got a whole lot of sort of good advice about grounding in the present and looking after yourself and doing ordinary things. And indeed, if there's any suggestion of risk, get in touch with the mental health services, even though you don't frame what's happening in their way. At least they'll stop you killing yourself or something.
Yeah.
Um, and we've also got groups, which most of which are now online, where people can support each other, people who've been through these experiences. And I guess I've probably I've seen plenty of examples like that really through this, through this organization. And I've written, if you look on my website, I think, have I, oh, I don't know, how many of these, I can't remember what I put where on the website. I've written quite a lot of book chapters and things in conjunction with people who've been through really difficult experiences, been locked up in hospital and this, that, and the other, but who have come through it and have seen this as part of a transformative journey, but one that took a dark turn and they needed help to haul themselves out of.
I mean, I can relate a story for everyone.
Mm.
That I was doing a remote viewing session. And so remote viewing is when you're using a piece of paper and you've got a coordinates, which are just a series of numbers. You're completely blind to the target. The target is on a computer behind a number. You have to press on the number and the target's going to come up. And so I'm doing this session and I am wrapped in fear. I am
Mm. Mm.
I don't know why. I think it's coming from, it's like an implicit memory of, like, fear. there's no reason I'm afraid, but I am terrified.
Mm,
And I said, okay, I need to stop this target. This is not good. Yeah, whatever is happening.
mm, mm.
And the target that was there was an Apollo rocket taking off.
Oh,
And I was on top of the rocket. I was
ah,
obviously viewing the rocket because I've
yeah.
done enough viewing to know that I hit the target. Yeah. But you
Mm,
don't want to be there. Like you actually bilocate when you do remote viewing. You actually don't want to be there. But I was terrified and I stopped remote viewing because
yeah, yeah,
nobody could tell me what I should do when I start to feel terrified of the
yeah,
target. And
yeah,
so
yeah. No, sensible thing to do. Yes.
that's what I always tell people, same with
Yeah.
meditation. If you don't feel comfortable, just stop.
No, no.
This is
Yeah,
about
yeah.
your natural mind. Something else is getting involved. Chill.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm.
Your mind is in its pure nature happy, in my understanding. So what would you have, I mean, would you have given me an advice of something to
Well, you
do?
did the right thing. Ground, if you're sort of traveling, you're by doing that, you are leaving your individual self-consciousness. You're leaving that sort of joined up place in order to be able to relate beyond it. And sometimes, very often, that experience of relating beyond is quite ecstatic, like the sort of mystical experience. You're at one with the universe or something like that. But it can equally be extremely dangerous. And in that place, you are not in control. So you need to ground yourself in the present, in your human body and your physical surroundings back again in order to have some sort of control and safety.
So would that be like, I feel the table, I feel my hands,
Yes,
I feel my
yes,
face, I
yes.
feel my
You
body. Like,
notice that you are breathing and what that feels like. Look around, I say, notice something in your surroundings that you never actually noticed before. So really look.
hmm. Yes,
That's the advice I give
that's
people.
that's so interesting because it brings me to another experience. I think you'll relate to it. I was in the south of China on the border with Laos, and we were next to a temple, and they have these tiny huts that's as big as a one of these old, outhouses, toilets, WC in the
Mm,
garden. And the
mm,
monk was sitting there, and I looked at the monk, and there was this electric connection. And
mm,
then in the afternoon, I had a kip, and I woke up, and I didn't know where I was.
mm,
I couldn't see reality. I couldn't
mm,
see
mm,
reality. So I just like started touching things to feel what is real now.
mm, mm,
And then
mm.
in seconds, it's like the universe organized itself. Like the universe
Yes.
organizing itself is a
Yeah.
natural experience for our
Mm,
mind. It just does it.
yeah.
Um, but it, but I could have been. He's just as easily caught up in an eddy
Yeah.
of uh, the
Yeah.
Germans say Wahn or what's craziness? Yeah, I think.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um,
You were across the threshold. You'd crossed the threshold, and you needed to get back. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's been so interesting asking in the psychic remote viewing community.
Mm,
Tell me, have you had any experiences of losing yourself? Have you had any psychotic
mm,
experiences? And of
mm,
course, a bit like publication bias, a bit like, confirmation bias, everyone says, no, I've only had good
mm,
experiences. But I'm
mm.
only asking the people that are there, the people who
Yeah.
were who got completely freaked out by Reiki or freaked out
Mm,
by
mm.
remote viewing, they're not there anymore. They've gone.
Well, yeah. We get plenty of those in the Spiritual Crisis Network. Plenty of people freaked out by Reiki have been to sort of intensive meditation retreat, and it all went horribly wrong. So yes, that, but also the other. I mean, there are other things. There are other things that can cause it to go wrong, can push people over, and high stress, intolerable life events that upend somebody's sense of self
Mm.
can do it. And earlier trauma will make that threshold easier to cross. And time goes out the window once you're across the threshold. So you're dealing with what's happening now and particularly threatening things that happened earlier on to you.
So it's really fascinating from an energy point of view. When I've seen an accident, people's energies just get big. Their
Mm.
energies just literally expands. Their feeling of self changes, so then the boundaries automatically expand. Yeah, that's what I've seen.
Mm.
And you even have there's research. I've forgotten what is. Um, oh, I can't remember, but he wrote the something like the mysterious life of pronouns. And people under stress, they stop saying, but they stop using personal pronouns.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
That's
say,
interesting. Yes.
so that their actually feeling for self disappears, and they start
Yeah.
talking about we and our community. And so you can
Mm.
actually see that, say, somebody that had actually lost a kid is going to talk about we and not talk about themselves. Somebody that, well, there are cases where people, do something to their children and they don't want to be found out.
Mm.
They'll talk about themselves and how bad they're feeling, whereas people that aren't generally, yeah, will talk in a different way. And of course, I've seen, like, if I think back to Joe McMoneagle, who got the Legion of Merit from the United States president for his work remote viewing. His childhood was horrible, and he went through PTSD, and he died several times. The man has gone through so many
Mm.
boundary experiences that I think there's a definite correlation between.
Oh, no, there is definitely a correlation. Yeah, the and because and I think you can understand it in terms of the way that the self gets put together as you grow up. That where somebody has repeated um, unmanageable
Mm,
experiences that cannot be um, sort of processed.
yeah.
Um, there'll be holes in how they are put together, and
Is that like when you experience trauma, you have your
yeah,
explicit memory, and then it overwhelms you, and you go into implicit
yes,
memory.
that's
Like you
right.
literally
Yes, if
black out.
you dissociate, and so there are gaps, and that is those gaps make it easier to unravel this joined up self
So
that
it's almost like
normally
a
protects us.
it's almost like a gift with poison in a way. That there's a
Yes,
German
yes,
there's
yes.
a German.
It's both. Yeah, it's both a gift and a vulnerability.
Yes, I certainly I noticed that quite a lot. Um, there's
I
also
mean, the schizotypy literature proves that yes, the high schizotypes who often will be, people who've had earlier experiences that create this vulnerability. Yes, if they're going to have a breakdown, it's likely to be a psychotic one, but they are also the high creatives, the spiritual people. And so there are highly valued characteristics that go on with being able to cross the threshold,
hmm.
particularly if you can get back again.
This whole area has been studied by Stanford Research Institute. It's been studied in Russia when Brezhnev was got Parkinson's, according to
Mm.
Dr. Ed May's book, ESP Wars, where he went in to study what the Soviets were doing with psychic research.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
they brought in a healer from Bulgaria who healed him, and then there was money to study it. Yeah, it's like we could use this, um,
Mm.
and so it begs the question. I think I know the answer, but it begs the question: can you talk about, or has any intelligence services come to you and said, can you
Good
help?
heavens, no.
Good heavens,
Not
no.
my world.
Okay, so the actual day-to-day psychics generally, unless they got a problem, they're not going to come into touch with you.
No, I mean, there are a number of psychics, my colleagues in the Spiritual Crisis Network. Some of them are definitely psychics and, are aware of that. And usually psychics who are practicing psychics and mediums are quite good at managing this stuff. They know how to go backwards. They've got techniques and what have you to go backwards and forwards across the threshold, which is the trick.
I mean, it certainly seems like you've spearheaded a positive shift in the way we're approaching these experiences, because literally, before your well, I mean, I'm saying your innovations, people will have generally been medicated and put in a rubber room.
Well, they still are.
They still are. Okay.
I have no illusion about the extent of my influence. I nibble away, but
Right. So
I work. I mean, tomorrow I'm going to a psychiatric hospital to see somebody, because though most of my work is teaching and stuff, I have a tiny caseload, usually of people that are kind of going to cause trouble to the trust. But I work within a system where the assumption is, you pour loads of medication down people's throats until they kind of
what was interesting for me was my experience. Sorry to interrupt you, but what was interesting my experience was like, if somebody was having a psychic experience, you just say, that's not true, that's not real, come back, whereas it always felt to me, wouldn't it be interesting to ask them about their psychic experience instead of socially, because I felt when I started feeling energy, I was 25 and I didn't want to tell anybody. I was literally living. I call it a secondary autism. Secondary autism. Everybody that I meet, I cannot tell them a lot of things about my personal experience of the world. I am alone. If I find somebody I can talk to, I've got a little bubble in my reality I can share this with. And they may well turn around to me on a sixpence and go, "Oh, yeah, that's a bit weird." And suddenly you're, offended. So, but is it, as a therapist, do you talk to people about their experience? Are you more inclusive?
Well, I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, what I teach, and a lot of the time I'm teaching nurses and psychologists and people. What I say is I talk about shared and unshared reality. So my advice, to people, and this is what I did when I did work for 10 years. I worked in acute. I was meeting people in psychosis in the hospital, and they tell me about, their delusional system or their voices or something like that. And I'd say, first of all, I can see this must have been absolutely terrifying for you, or this must have felt really exhilarating, because the feeling is real. The feeling is authentic. So first of all, you validate the feeling. And then I can say, I can see that for you, this is absolutely, or, you can hear these voices, or, for you, this is how it is. Have you noticed that the other people around don't see it like that? And almost always the person would recognize that. They might say they're wrong, etc., etc. And then I would say, and this is what I teach people, actually, as human beings, we don't have access to the whole of reality. But there is a shared reality which most of us work with. And in your case, you might say there's nothing wrong with you. It's their problem. Actually, it is your problem, because you're under a section in the hospital. you need to take seriously the fact that people are concerned about you. And you need to work with us to, recognize their concerns and try to sort out their concerns.
Yes.
So that is what I teach people in hospitals, and quite a lot are using it.
And it's so I mean you talk about it in another interview about this Platonic cave where Plato's got this, or I think it's Plato or Aristotle. I think it's Plato.
Yeah, it's Plato. Plato.
He's looking. Everyone's looking out this tiny hole. I think that's reality. Somebody leaves the cave and gets a view, comes back in the cave and says, "By the way, everything you're seeing, there's more." And they go, "No. No. That's right." So it's more the coming back that's where we have trouble integrating. And for me, it was very much like when I came back out of China, it was like I've got a view that's a treasure, and if I integrate, I'm going to lose that treasure. I do not want to integrate to that point. Because then I'm going to lose something which is a treasure for everybody. It's not just a treasure for me. We all have, to some extent, a capacity to have a little bit of more information, and we can use that information to make hopefully better.
I mean, the message we try to give, and we've got a program called the What is Real group, which you can find on my website, and I also write about it. I write about it in Madness, Mystery, and the Survival of God. And we do then, yes, that's right. We do in that program, we are giving people a bit of just an edge of the vision that if they can manage both sides of they can come backwards and forwards, then they can make use of, as I say, we talk about the fact that creativity and that sort of thing goes along with this. Provided for them personally, this is something positive. Because, I mean, some people, of course, it's just horrible and they want to shut it all down, and then they're on a page with the service. But for the people who value those experiences, we're giving a bit of a vision. If you can manage to keep yourself safe, then the mental health services won't be interested in you, which is probably good news. But if you can manage both sides of the threshold, then you can make use of these insights and what have you that you get. The danger is that the service gives people, as I say, the sense of self is fluid. And once you've been given the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, your sense of self goes
Yeah.
And if in your delusional state, you're very powerful, or you've got, sort of a good thing, why would you want to join the rest of us? So I'm trying to make the argument that we have to make it worthwhile. It's hard for people to come back, and we have to make it worthwhile for them.
It's a very interesting. These are points. I think there's the term spiritual materialism. When you have I've had it. So when you've had these highs, you spend years trying to recreate them. Literally, I need to get this high. The spirituality becomes about getting another high, instead of what it was originally. You were kind of told, it's about finding out who you are. And by the way, that's an enigma inside a puzzle. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you can get people who just get addicted to the trip, basically.
Yes. And the irony,
and of course, you can. Drugs are the way that most people in our society attain these places. So it is a potentially addictive activity if you don't keep on that wobbly balancing act.
But I mean, I don't know your take, but I mean, I take generally drugs that are a little bit dangerous, a little bit
Oh, of
dodgy.
course. Yeah, no. I'm no advocate for drugs of any sort.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against people expanding their consciousness in a very, very reverent way in a very safe space with a company and so on. But
Mm, mm.
even then, they are rolling
Oh,
it.
yeah, it can go wrong. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit of a sledgehammer.
And then getting them back from your point of view is even harder, I guess. Or
Well, I mean, it'll vary from person to person. It depends on, as I say, their previous history, really, and how, what there is to get back to, how coherent what there is to get back to is.
Hmm. Do you feel so we've one thing we haven't really talked about, which I'm
Mm,
interested in Robert Faulkner, is these outside forces, so outside entities.
yeah,
I think I always like to say like a word connects you to an energy field. So if you call somebody a thing, they feel almost like put in a prison. So if you say you're a paranoid schizophrenic, then
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. But then there's things like curses, spells, where an energy is
Mm.
projected to something.
Yeah, interesting connection.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
literally, when I'm doing energy work, I say like a curse can be somebody literally said something bad about you and thought something bad about you with
Mm,
a very clear intent. And they
mm.
weren't trying to hurt you, but in that moment, they just rubbished you and you
Yeah.
still feel it for years. Um, is that something you've come across and have you worked with it and have you had success with it?
Right. No, I haven't sort of explicitly worked with it, except, I mean, it comes into, I think it's part of therapy, really, isn't it? The impact of, you meet somebody, what happened last week, and, if somebody said something devastating, then you work with that. So yes, I mean, in the sense that I think it's part of the bed and butter of therapy. And I know myself what it feels like if somebody says something demolishing to me. I feel demolished and have to start putting myself back together again. I think that's a normal human experience. And of course, curse is just a particularly powerful form of it.
That's the way I was taught about it. And so it sounds like the focus of it, and correct me, please, the focus of what you're doing is really helping people reestablish their boundaries, reestablish themselves, and then not be so strict with what the self is.
Mm, mm.
Would you
Well,
say
to
that?
understand better I think understanding their potential is very important. In my mental health work is focused around a particular way of formulating, of making sense of things. It's quite a visual way, and um, uh, getting people's strengths. We have a strengths bow is really important part of it. All the things they care about, all the things they're good at, all the good relationships in their life, their any sense of spiritual connection, all that, getting all that named, because that is going to be, it's a whole array of resources
Mm,
that they've got themselves into a diminished place
mm,
because they're trying to manage the unmanageable feeling, and they need to be able to draw on all these potentials. So the idea that we aren't finished, that we aren't, this isn't
okay.
the finished article. We can always develop.
Oh, right. That's nice. That's given me a um, new point of view. Um, and how was your husband's work related to your work? Is that something you can talk about?
Right. Yeah. Well, my husband was, I mean, his career was as a mathematician, a cosmologist, and he worked with Stephen Hawking in Cambridge and published important papers. Stephen wanted us to stay in Cambridge, but Chris was somebody he had a very vivid sort of social conscience and that kind of thing, and found Cambridge intolerable. So, took a job in York, but then he came back, he got a chair in Southampton, and he was interested in the wider picture of things. So the very small and the very large, the things we don't really understand, this is what he was pinning down with mathematics. But he got very disillusioned with the universities. 99, he basically walked away, because by that time I'd started my career, and we've never been great spenders, so that wasn't an issue. And so he then got involved with organizations about, we've always, right from when we met, we were both, I say to people when we met, we were earnest young Christians. And we got involved very early on with the Epiphany philosophers and that sort of contemplative Christianity. I mean, he was, he had a conversion experience, and he was brought up in an atheist household, but he'd had a conversion experience before he met me. So he was very interested in the whole spiritual dimension. So he really turned over to writing about, and he's written books on, accessible books. His previous books were seriously inaccessible. On science and spirituality, from a physics, quantum theory sort of. He was very scathing about an awful lot that's written about quantum theory and energy and such like things, by people, right, who don't. I mean, he knew the hard science, absolutely. And as I say, he wrote his own books. He was chair of the Scientific and Medical Network for a while. He was chair of Green Spirit. We were both of us very ecologically active. We were, he was active in Scientists Against Nuclear Arms in the 80s. We were both very active in the road protest movement in the 90s. So we've been activists. Sort of justice is something we both care desperately about.
Yeah, and that is so much something. It's something so connected with the self. Like we are. If somebody says something incorrect about you, you automatically feel the need that. It's very, very hard to stop yourself from correcting it. But I find it also, referring back to that physics and maths connection, how Stanford research was, the psychic research was run by aviation engineers, laser physicists who were interested in the data, because the data's not going to lie, and it's generally psychologists are the first to sort of say no, we don't want to take that too seriously. So his conversion experience, because I had a very funny story. One of my teachers is a New Zealand lady. Both her parents are atheists. When she was 27, 28, she's in the intensive care unit as a nurse, and Mary appeared. Apparition of Mary. And she's not famous or anything, but it's like Mary appeared, and then things started happening in her life. She said it's nothing you choose. It's just something that happens. Yeah. She's down to earth. I mean, she'd done all the nursing, she'd done all these academic things, and then you have people appearing in your life, and then you say, okay, so what my parents told me, they did their best, but they didn't know. They didn't have these experiences. Did Chris have some experiences?
He did. No, I don't think it was like that. I can't really remember. I don't think he's really written about it. It was, he was sort of exploring and went to he went to all the different services. He went to the very evangelical ones, and he went to the very high church ones, and he went to the in the middle ones, and just had a sort of revelatory experience. I think in the context of the very evangelical ones who are, that's their business, really, these kind of conversions. But in fact, he didn't stick with them. He went, we both of us were in a say more in the contemplative side. So I think, he had all his life, he had a mystical side. But I think for neither of us, I think really both of us were probably quite lucky in never having, we've also got a very grounded side.
Yes.
I think we shared a sense of humor. We never took anything too seriously.
Very important, yeah.
I think again, I said that in the.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, Isabel, I think we've covered it.
Yeah, I think we probably covered everything. Yeah.
I think I want to mention to everybody that you can go and study. You can go and study and read about Isabel's work, especially practically. Like there's things you could read here which you can practically apply when somebody.
Shall I just explain the two? This one is the one about understanding the transliminal, basically, and it ranges very widely. It's got the specific stories of three people at the heart of it, and unpacking those, but it covers very wide issues about faith, about politics, about ecology. The other one, this one, is about my work in mental health. And I got to the right way up. Yes, it's sort of how to do it, basically.
Yes.
And it's quite detailed. It's based around, this one is based around composite cases. The other book actually has got a lot of real people's stories in it, and which they rewrote and looked at and stuff. But the three composite people, one who's sort of severe depression, another one with the sorts of behaviors that give you the horrible diagnosis of EUPD, can't even remember what it stands for, personality. It's some sort of personality disorder, which is a horrible, horrible label. And the third one, somebody with psychosis under section in a hospital. And it shows sort of therapy and conversations with them. It's quite detailed.
Yeah, I think that's where the both kind of meet. Is there's such a stigma to either if I say to people publicly, I'm a psychic, I do energy work, I help people over a distance, I don't need to meet them. In fact, if you give me a name, I will start to get information about them. In some cases, it's like the signal line that if the radio's clear, I can pick up. If it's not, I don't know why. Yeah. And there's a stigma connected to that, and I think it's. I was saying psychic's the new gay, but I think you could say psychic. Saying you're psychic or you have psychic abilities and having a mental health problem, they've both got a stigma attached to them.
Well, particularly a mental health problem, if it gets diagnosed. Again, there's research showing that if people with the same level of disturbing experience, if they see it as part of their psychic journey or part of their spiritual journey or something, compared with if they go to the hospital, they do an awful lot better on that side. And there's hard research from South London and Maudsley, and you can't get more respectable than South London and Maudsley to show that.
Isn't it funny? It's similar.
And epidemiological research to show that in people in traditional societies, I say in my that's all quoted in my I quote that research in all my books because it's so important. Yeah.
Yes. That's a great thing to be reminded of.
Yeah.
Thank you
Anyway,
so much.
I ought to go. Yes.
I feel like you've given us a lot and you've given everybody in the community a lot. So thank you so much for that. And yes, all the best.
Yeah.
Keep up the
Right.
good
I'm
work.
sure also with you and your podcast and living in Thailand, which must be fun.
Thank you very much.
Right.